This webinar is brought to you by the Shekhar Institute in collaboration with thevibes.com. Because it matters.
Ladies and gentlemen, my name is P. Gunasegaram and I'm Chief Executive of Advocacy and Research Organization Shekhar Institute, which together with news portal The Vibes brings you today's webinar, Emergency, Democracy and the Rule of Law. Allow me to warmly welcome you to this webinar, the fourth in our series, Because it matters. This is not only topical, but rather controversial. An emergency subverting the rule of law weighs down heavily on an already tenuous democracy compromised by party hopping to remove a legitimate government. Where do we go from here? Prolongation of emergency? A new government? Elections? When? Our panel will try to shed some light. Let me introduce them. Tan Sri Tommy Thomas, former Attorney General and practicing lawyer. He is no stranger to Malaysians, and his controversial book, My Story, Justice in the Wilderness, which also dealt with his time as AG, attracted a lot of positive attention and some negative too. Welcome, Tommy.
Thank you.
Dato Sri Samshul Iskandar Muhammad Akin is the Information Chief and Vice President of PKR. He is MP for Hang Tuah Jaya, Melaka, and former Deputy Minister. He holds a law degree from the International Islamic University. Welcome, Dato Sri.
Thank you, Guna. Thank you. Morning, everyone.
Tan Sri Pandika Amin Mulia is well known as former Speaker of the Parliament. He is a prominent Sabah politician and President of UMNO Baru and a former UMNO member. Welcome, Tan Sri.
Thank you.
Howard Lee is DAP's Socialist Youth Chief and Perak State Executive Councillor. He is making waves as a youth activist. In 2016, Lee was elected as the new president of the International Union of Socialist Youth. He is the first Southeast Asian to be elected to the position. Welcome, Howard.
Thank you, Guna. Thank you. Thank you to everyone.
Finally, we have Dato Aflin Shauki, well-known actor, producer, and social activist. He is also a singer, writer, and is involved with stage, screen, and TV. He is Chief Executive of Petra Media. Welcome, Aflin.
Thank you very much, Mr. Guna. Good morning to everyone. Hope you all are safe and having a great morning.
Okay. We have selected the panelists to reflect a diversity of backgrounds and expertise. I will direct questions to speakers according to what is the area of competence, but everyone is free to chip in and ask questions of each other in a true forum format. Dato Sri Azalina Osman, Deputy Speaker, UMNO Supreme Council member and MP for Pengerang, offers her regrets for not being able to participate after having agreed earlier due to obligations to a constituency where a vaccination drive is being organized. A few quick words about Shekhar Institute. Shekhar Institute is a research and advocacy organization to explain, publicize, and promote the concept of social or good capitalism, which believes taking care of everyone in the value chain is good for business and is a tool to lift people out of poverty too. It also promotes intelligent and considered debate on social, public, and economic issues to build awareness and enable appropriate policy formulation and implementation. As part of the program to build consensus and awareness over important issues and galvanize action, the Shekhar Institute organizes seminars, webinars, will publish appropriate papers and journals. So we are now showing you a copy of the journal, which we have produced for a look at the cover. Can we share the screen for the journal, please? It is available in both print as well as online format. Okay, thanks. That's how the journal looks at the moment. Shekhar Institute is a unit within the diversified Petra Group of companies whose chairman and CEO is Dato Vinod Shekhar. He's also chairman of Shekhar Institute. I would like to invite him to make the opening address. Over to you, Vinod.
Thank you all. It's wonderful to have you all here. I can't thank the speakers enough for agreeing to spend this Saturday morning with us. I'm not going to say much because really there are far, far more important people and far more learned people on this panel than I. But let me just open by saying that I'm a very straightforward and simple businessman, and the situation here is untenable from my perspective, and I'm sure from many of yours. We went to the first MCO when our numbers were in the hundreds. We are now in the thousands. Quite frankly, if you tested more, we'll probably be well over 10,000. If we tested less, we'll go below 1,000. So, I'm not sure whether testing further blankly is going to make any difference. I am also concerned, and I'm going to make these points so that perhaps during the discussion, these issues can be addressed by people that know about it much more than I do. But perhaps using these numbers to subvert democracy, to subvert parliament, is something that we should see as unacceptable. I have always been confused by the need for this emergency. Again, I'm not a lawyer, I'm not a constitutional expert, neither am I a politician, but we have a Health Emergency Act, I believe, and that covers every rational need to try and deal with this pandemic. As I understand it, this emergency allows the government two things, well, perhaps three, and I would love to hear from Tan Sri Tommy and others if I'm off the mark. But the three things, as I see it very blankly, and I'm sure there are others, but one is that they don't need parliament. Parliament is suspended. So democracy is suspended, habeas corpus is suspended. Second, they have a blank check. You can pretty much write anything you want for any amount you want without any oversight whatsoever. And three, if I'm not mistaken, and again, I'd like to be corrected if I'm wrong, anything that is done during this emergency by those in authority are immune from prosecution. Now, to me, that's dangerous, that is unhealthy. But most significantly, if it made a difference to the pandemic, I guess we can all swallow it and accept it, but it's not. Since the emergency started, the situation has deteriorated. Our economy has deteriorated. The health system is under pressure like at no time before. So this emergency hasn't worked. Perhaps because of the lack of oversight, perhaps because of the lack of accountability. Again, this is the conversation we have to have. I am not advocating an election, a snap election by any means in this current pandemic, but let's be very clear here. Singapore held an election without having to call an emergency. So did the US, so did the UK, so did many, many other countries. So, we don't have to have an election, but why do we have an emergency? The more important part of this entire escapade that we're in is, what can we as a people do? It seems we're helpless. It seems our politicians are helpless. From a normal Malaysian's perspective, and I'm not targeting anyone here, I'm just saying, from a normal Malaysian's perspective, it seems politicians are playing their own games. This person wants to be prime minister, that person wants to be prime minister, that person, is trying to get the numbers. They've got X, they've got Y. One group will not tie up with another group because they just can't. And it's very frustrating for normal Malaysians. Malaysians are suffering. There are people that cannot find enough to eat in a given week. They don't know if they'll have enough funds to pay for their family's daily food. And that's just the start of it. I've seen this firsthand. It's heartbreaking. And this is Malaysia, for God's sake. When did we become this country? And it is very disheartening So what happens next? Will there be a change in government? Will Parliament convene before August 1st, as now promised by the de facto law minister, who earlier on said, no, Parliament doesn't need to until sometime in October, or others in authority who said, no, Parliament needs time to prepare for politicians and MPs to come in to convene the session. I guess there's a need for, Zoom instructions and other things, especially since MPs are already fully vaccinated. So all this is confusing for just normal Malaysians. When we just look at the whole thing, there's so much noise and so little leadership. And we look to the panelists here to enlighten us, to give us some bearing on where we are now, where we could go. And I can't tell you how important this conversation is now, and I hope this conversation continues. We, the Malaysian people, have to stand up. We have to ensure the politicians realize they work for us. We don't work for them. We pay their salaries, they do what we say. And if they don't do what we say, we remove them. The problem right now is, under the current conditions, we can't remove anybody. And we are now reliant on politicians and MPs, our representatives, to fix themselves, to deal with the situation for us and take us out of this nightmare from a socio-economic level and at a health level. And I am a half-glass full person, and I'm confident we will find our way. I am very confident that we will get there eventually. But we need nation builders. We need nation builders from all walks of life, whether they're politicians, whether they're technocrats, civil servants, businessmen. We need nation builders to come together now and realize that this is a historic time. This is a dangerous time. This is something we've never, ever had to face before. It's global, but from a national standpoint, it's something we've never had to face. And perhaps it's time for all of us to come together and deal with this, politics aside, if possible. I look forward to the input all of you have to give. I thank you so much for being part of this. I welcome everyone that's watching this on Zoom and Facebook. And again, the conversation must not stop now. Tomorrow, July 4th, is the date that I believe UMNO has stated that they will pull out or make a statement if Parliament is not reconvened. Parliament is not reconvened. Parliament could have been reconvened, if I'm not mistaken, almost immediately under the emergency proclamation. Again, I'm not sure. The panelists can enlighten us if that is true. So lots happening in the next few days, lots happening in the next few weeks, and lots of rumors, lots of speculation. And we Malaysians can just sit there and watch the soap opera and hope it has a happy ending. Thank you again for being part of this, and I'm very much looking forward to the discussion. Guna, over to you.
Thank you, Vinod. Before we move into the discussions, allow me to make a very short presentation to set the stage. Let me share the screen. Give me a moment. All right. Can you see that? Okay. The title of the presentation is Emergency, Democracy, and the Rule of Law. And let's just start with emergency. So there have been quite a number of emergencies in Malaysia. Let's just go through them. the 1948 to 1960 emergency, which was for the communist insurgency. And then in 1964, we had one for the Indonesian confrontation. 1966, there was a constitutional crisis in Sarawak over the appointment of the chief minister. 1969 was the big one, the May 13 racial riots. This one was a huge game changer and probably changed the complexion of democracy in Malaysia right up to date. 1977 emergency was the worsening state of central between the state and central in with respect to Kelantan state. And then we had three more, which is for the haze in 1997, 2005, and 2013. So in November 2011, under Najib Razak, three emergency proclamations were lifted: 1966, 1969, and 1977. Remember, all these emergencies were still in place up until that point of time. So effectively, the non-emergency years were 1960 to 64, period of 4 years, and 2011 to 2021. So that's 14 years in all. So we were in a state of emergency for 50 years out of 64 years of independence. That's really not very democratic. So the hangover from the emergency were oppressive flaws. Just to enumerate, the Internal Security Act, which was replaced in 2012 by Najib by the Security Offences Special Measures Act, which was equally draconian. And then the Sedition Act, this was very draconian and limited expression. Even if you said something true, which is true, but if it is likely to incite public discontent, for instance, you could be charged under the Act. So it was extremely wide-ranging. Then the Printing Presses and Publications Act, which controlled the press more or less completely, the license could be suspended unilaterally by the government under the Act. And the next sample is the Official Secrets Act, which suppressed information and discouraged whistleblowing. Mahathir made this act even more onerous by making a mandatory jail sentence, by making a jail sentence mandatory for offenses under the Act. So not only were the laws kept, but in some instances were strengthened as well. Now, moving on from emergency, let us just talk very briefly about the constitutional confusion. And these are the clauses in the Constitution which are frequently cited in the ongoing debate. Article 41 of the Constitution, the Yang di-Pertuan Agong shall act in accordance with the advice of the Cabinet or of a minister acting under the general authority of the Cabinet, except as otherwise provided by this Constitution. So the other one, which appears to be in some cases in conflict with this, is this. Article 42, the Yang di-Pertuan Agong may act in its discretion in the performance of the following functions. That is to say, A, the appointment of a prime minister and the withholding of consent to a request for the dissolution of parliament. And then we move on from here to what is stated in the emergency ordinance. The relevant clause is this, section 14(1)(b) of the emergency ordinance 2021. Parliament shall be summoned, prorogued, and dissolved on a date as the Yang di-Pertuan Agong thinks fit. The apparent conflicts in this have been widely debated in the press in the last few days, and this panel will discuss this and the clauses in the Constitution as well as the two clauses within the Constitution. And then the final part is restoring democracy and the kind of measures which we can possibly take and which we hope to discuss here. This could be repealing oppressive laws. These are things which have been talked about over the years many times. New anti-party hopping legislation, which will prevent instability by people jumping from one party to another to effect government change. A new Freedom of Information Act, which will require the government to disclose appropriate information and to disclose non-sensitive information publicly. And then a political funding act which will regulate the way parties can obtain funds, and therefore putting all political parties on a more equal footing in Malaysia. These are some of the measures that can be discussed, but without will and a change of leaders, will it be possible? Let me just stop sharing the screen here. All right. So let's move to the discussion proper. We will allocate 11:45 to 12:15 p.m. for questions, and then wrap up the discussion to end around 12:30 p.m. Please submit your questions from now, and then we will ask that during question time. Also, we would encourage participants to put Zoom participants to to set it on speaker view, your Zoom to speaker view, so that enables better connections. In the first round of questions, we will talk about the emergency and no confidence motion. So we will start with Tan Sri Thomas. What's your position regarding the constitutional impasse? Can the king call for parliament to be reconvened, or can he reconvene parliament only on the advice of the prime minister?
Thank you, moderator, for inviting me to the panel. The short answer to your question is yes. In my opinion, the constitutional monarch can summon parliament of his own motion and on its own initiative. But before I elaborate, can I just remind everybody of some overriding principles? You cannot answer the question you pose in a vacuum. The context is this. Malaysia has a constitutional system where the constitution is supreme. We have the separation of powers between the branches of government. We have parliamentary democracy. We have accountable and responsible governance. So what that means is when you ask the question, can the king as the constitutional monarch as, and in a sense, although not applicable here, the conference of rulers who also have a role, you must take those principles and keep them in mind. Now to answer, so that is the general background. The specific answers I would give is to say that in my opinion, Article 40 is not relevant in answering the question. You must turn to Part 4 of the Constitution, which deals with the Federation, and in particular Chapter 4, which is the Federal Legislature. Parliament. I'm sorry, it's going to take me around 30 seconds. Under Article 44, we have the king in parliament, which is very typical of Westminster democracy, which means there are three constituent parts to parliament. People forget that. There is a young...
sorry, Tommy, some people are having problem hearing you. Could you speak a bit louder and maybe move towards the speaker? Thanks.
Sorry. And I'll speak a bit louder. The Article 44 says that the Parliament is comprised or constitutes of three separate agencies: the Yang Pertuan Agong, the Dewan Rakyat, and the Dewan Negara. So the king is a part of Parliament, and that is also demonstrated by two other parts, which is Article 16, which gives the king the right to address either house of parliament. Of course, we know that the king's speech is, of course, written by the government, but there is nothing stopping a king to say, I want to address the two houses and say what I want personally. That's been done slightly in the UK and other countries. And then we mustn't forget that that part of the king being part of parliament is that the king, laws can only become laws, bills can only be effective when the king assents to the bills, and that is Article 68. And of course, we know that in the 1990s constitutional crisis, we had to change that prerogative to money bills. So those three examples in the Constitution, Articles 44, 60, and 68, tells you that the king, as constituent part of Parliament, has got a lot of rights. And then Article 55, in particular, answers your question. Article 55(1) says, the young people of the Nabab shall from time to time summon Parliament. And of course, subsection 2 says he can dissolve, but we are at the summoning stage. So it's my opinion that when the young people of the Nabab exercises these powers in Articles 44, 55, 60, 62, 68, he is acting in his personal capacity and not on the advice of the Prime Minister.
Okay, thank you. In practical terms, how can this be achieved, Tommy?
Well, the young people just summons, he just signs a document. He just proclaims. The practical aspects are very simple. If he just decides to write out a letter, it's done.
And then
what I'm trying to say is that my understanding of these articles, combined effect of this, is that especially in a stalemate that we have today, where the speaker, who has a role in the convening and summoning of Parliament, lower house at least, and the head of government, the Prime Minister of the day, they all have roles. I accept that, but it doesn't mean that if you have a stalemate, Parliament cannot sit because the king cannot impose his rights under these articles that I just mentioned. He can easily, because there will be otherwise be a constitutional crisis, as there is now, there's an impasse, and the system is done in such a way he can resolve the impasse. Don't forget, again, very similar to the proclamation of emergency, he signs the proclamation. And when to revoke, the signature is again of the king, revoking the emergency. Of course, in most cases, that is prepared by the Prime Minister, the executive branch. But in our case, in the facts of our case, I don't see any reason why he can't sign a document.
Okay, so let's be clear about this. Say, for instance, the speakers of both houses and as well as the deputy speakers have already announced that they're committed to reconvening of Parliament in line with the wishes of the king. So would it be correct to say that if the king signs a proclamation to say that the Parliament must open on such a day, that then it takes place and that the speakers will are committed to reopening the Parliament? All it then takes is a signature from the king then?
That's right. See, I think what you would have noticed from the debate so far, at least to my knowledge, and I must say I've not been following it that closely, but is that none of the speakers and people who've spoken about it, who've written about it, have considered the matter from the way I have considered it, which is I have taken into consideration chapter 4, which deals with the federal parliament in the constitution and these articles. Now, when you talk about the emergency ordinances and all the other and the standing orders of parliament, all those will not prevail against the constitution because the constitution is supreme. Now, when the emergency ordinance in section paragraph 14 attempts to oust the constitution, that itself is unconstitutional. This is why I began by saying the constitution is supreme. So, for example, Guna, you gave quite rightly, and you reminded all of us that for 50 years, we've had different kinds of emergencies in Malaysia. That's a fact. For 50 years out of our 60 over years of independence, of nationhood. But during those 50 years, you mustn't forget, Parliament was sitting, elections were held, and most importantly, the constitution was in place. We remained a constitutional government, a constitutional system, and all that emergencies did was to be at the background, and after some time people forgot about it. And a government cannot on the one hand try and tell the whole world, please come and invest in Malaysia. Malaysia is a great, stable financial and banking center, and on the other hand have emergency. So they were caught in a trap. An emergency was a fiction for 50 years. Life carried on. And that is the same here. And to me, I just want to say that before, I know you'll ask me this thing. To me, the problem today, the real problem is Malaysians are dying. We've got 6,000, we have nearly 6,000 deaths. We've got 750,000 of COVID cases. And we've got millions of Malaysians suffering economically, socially, and having mental issues. And I think against that background, the constitution and politics should not be in the way. If the question is asked, finally the emergency was imposed to resolve COVID. How has the emergency helped in resolving COVID, which is a medical problem? Thank you.
Okay. So the previous time that Parliament was suspended was in 1969, wasn't it? After the May 13 riots, and then it was restored in around 1970 or 71, I believe. Would it be correct to say that this is the only time that the Parliament is being suspended since then?
Well, that is correct. In other words, even your own example of the table shows that the proclamation of an emergency does not automatically result in the suspension of Parliament. The one occasion it has occurred was after the May 69 riots, which to me is a bad example, and we don't know whether anybody was listening. I know that the Bar Council at that point of time and some constitutional lawyers did object to it. But I mean, constitutional law has developed so much over 50 years. So the 69 example is a bad example. But as you said, by 1971, the NOC, which ran the country, governed the country for 2 years, was then replaced, and democracy came back through Parliament. But all the other examples, Parliament continued to survive and operate. And more importantly, general elections were held. And the point about general elections, and it comes to, is that campaigning is allowed. I mean, whatever you say about the state of Malaysian democracy, and we know it's in a poor state, historically, in the campaigning period, whether it's 10 days, 2 weeks, or 3 weeks, we really have true functioning democracy. And campaigning and general elections took place about 10 times. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, let's move on to Tan Sri Pandika. Assuming Parliament is reconvened, can a motion of no confidence in the government be tabled? The last time the motion of no confidence sat at the bottom of the pile and did not come up for hearing at all. How much discretion does the Speaker have in this respect?
Terutama sekali saya mengucapkan terima kasih kepada organisasi Vibes that kindly invited me to participate in this forum. From the outset, I would like to seek your permission, indulgence to allow me to speak in 2 languages. Sometimes I'll speak in Bahasa Malaysia, in some of the time I'll speak in Bahasa English. Now, to answer your question is this. Parliament Dewan Rakyat does not have any specific provisions for motions against the government. Motions against the government yaitu usul tidak percaya kepada kerajaan. We don't have any specific provisions for that. Having said that, a member of Parliament who is a backbencher or ordinary member of Parliament, normally what we debate in Parliament is through usul, through motions. In that is that must go through Standing Order 26 and 27. That is, from the outset, anybody that proposes a motion must give notice. In case of an ordinary member of Parliament, it is 14 days. If the usul or the motion is from a minister, it can be 7 days. However, hello, can you hear me? Yeah, however, if the motion is from a minister that can convince the Speaker of the day that a very important issue is that are very important to discuss. And if the speaker is satisfied with the explanation, then of course the speaker have a discretion to allow that whatever motion that is within 24 hours notice. Again, having stated all that, sometimes a question is always raised. I was the speaker, I was heavily criticized by the opposition and the public. And they said, why a very important matter like usul tidak percaya kepada kerjaan is never heard. Now this is the problem. Standing Order 15, the provision is very clear, whereby it says that the business to the speaker of the day cannot make a reason, if you can call that a discretionary, cannot make up a reason outside the ambit of the standing order of the Malaysian, standing order of Malaysian Parliament. You go to abide by it. Now, if you ask me, I will give the same reason that an usul tidak percaya kepada kerajaan cannot be debated, although it will be listed in the order paper of the day. And if you ask the current speaker now, who always criticized me those days when I was sitting there, is a speaker, that he said, well, in accordance to convention, of course you can allow important matter to be decided in Parliament. It must be debated. Now let me make it very clear here. Now, when you talk about convention, parliamentary convention, particularly if you look at the House of Commons, the House of Commons, actually their practice is basically on common law. So therefore, they always rely on political conventions. Now, in Malaysian Parliament, how do a speaker use discretionary power on the basis of political convention if the standing order is very clear, which states that the business of the government must be given precedence? Now, here is another thing that disturbs me very lately. If I can remember correctly, in the year of 2015, the then Ketua Pembangkang, Yang Berhormat Wan Aziza, tried to bring a motion of no confidence against then the Prime Minister of Malaysia, Datuk Seri Najib. And I was asked whether I would accept that motion. And I said, you, Yang Berhormat, knows your standing order very well. But nevertheless, why not just write a letter to the Setiausaha Dewan Rakyat, and let's see what will happen. But when the opposition then, Pakatan Harapan, were in the opposition, when they were in the opposition, you are very particular about this particular issue of motion of no confidence. However, I'm sorry to say this, Sam, Yang Berhormat Sam, I know you are listening. However, when Pakatan Harapan came into power and they were in power for 22 months, although they were talking about reformation of a parliamentary procedure or whatever, they did not touch on the motions of no confidence. And now here again, we are talking about motions of no confidence. And if you ask the current speaker now, who used to criticize me, he will cite the same thing. That is Standing Order 15.
Okay.
That the government business should be given precedence.
Okay, yeah, let me ask you this question. If you are a speaker now, for instance, if you're a speaker in this parliament, and then the motion of no confidence comes up, so are you going to give it priority, for instance? Will you move it up to the top of the pile?
No. Remember, you should remember that one motion from an MP, that is from Marang, I remember that it was allowed. I allowed it because during the session, a minister stood up and he said, with an usul, he said that government business of the day is done. And the next usul in that list was the usul from Marang, that is the RUU 355. I allowed that usul to be read because there is no other government business in the minister said so. If I were the minister, if I were the speaker now, and an usul come up to me, just an usul for any ordinary member, if it satisfies the requirement and the standing order 26 and 27, i.e. a proper notice is given, written letter is written to the Setiausaha Dewan Rakyat and signed by the proposer of the motion, it will be listed in the order paper. But it will not be debated, decided upon by the Majlis or the House because of Article 15 or Standing Order 15.
So, which means,
so in short, yes, in short, there is no discretionary power.
So which means if a motion of no confidence is put before Parliament, it can be indefinitely delayed and will not be put up for a vote in Parliament. Is that right? Is that what you're saying?
It will never see the light of day if the government of the day still have business to be decided upon by the House. That is our standing order, unless the government now change it or the future government change it. But my surprise was, why didn't the PH government change that? Why didn't they amend the standing order when they were in power for 22 months?
Okay. Now let's just go back to Tan Sri Tommy for 1 second. Now, does it require a motion in Parliament to change the government? If the king is satisfied, for instance, that the prime minister no longer enjoys a majority, can the king actually dismiss the government?
Well, Mr. Moderator, the starting position is, and can I just, before saying this, just make reference to the former speaker, and I've had a discussion with him previously. The speakers tend to look at the standing orders of Parliament, which they are guided by on a daily basis, forgetting that the supreme law is the federal constitution. So the standing orders are subject to the federal constitution. The federal constitution is supreme. Now, Article 43.4, to answer your question, moderator, Article 43.4 is the one that's relevant, which says if the prime minister ceases to command the confidence of the majority of the members of the Dewan Rakyat. So how does one test that? And the only way in Westminster parliamentary systems, and I should say it's not just Westminster, because last week Sweden had this. You could remember reading what happened in Sweden. Sweden is not British Commonwealth, but it's an advanced European democracy. So wherever there are parliaments, where there is majority and minority rule, prime ministers come and go based on the confidence they enjoy of the elected house. So you could have the confidence in January, you could lose it in March. And the only way to test it is in the lower house, the elected house. And that is always tested by a motion of no confidence, which the speaker in all the other parliaments would place on the floor. Now, it doesn't matter whether your standing order is silent or not. You don't need a standing order which specifically says standing order 46 or 62 or whatever, which says that the motion of no confidence must be placed. You don't need that. It's implied. So I would answer that. So and moving forward, what ought to happen? One solution to the impasse, now that we know Parliament is sitting in December by August 1st, is for His Majesty to say to the Prime Minister, to call the Prime Minister for an audience and to say, look, your political legitimacy is an issue. The whole country is not satisfied. Nobody is satisfied that you have 111 or 112 out of the 222 members of the elected floor. So you have, within a week of Parliament sitting, or within the first, second, or third day, you must have a motion of confidence. There must be a debate the whole day. There must be a debate. It must be deliberated. It must be televised so that we know the pros and cons. People may change their mind, and then a vote taken. And the young Kota can say to the Prime Minister, if you are defeated on that motion, you will have to resign, because that's what 43.4 says, and I will then form a new government in my judgment, who I think commands the confidence. So that is how the impasse can be worked out. And for that, all that the Speaker has to do is to present the motion of confidence, basically tabling it, just tabling it, based on the King and King's demand to the Prime Minister. Please demonstrate your numbers. Thank you.
Thank you, Tan Sri. Now let's move on to the politics of it. Dato Sri Samsul, moving on, do you see UMNO and Harapan cooperating to form a new government? Is it possible that such a government will be stable?
Baik, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Salam sejahtera, salam reformasi. Thank you, Guna. Thank you, distinguished panels. Of course, this conversation today is very important in the sense that I think the date is very strategic. It's the 13th day of the 14-day notice by UMNO, and of course, yesterday, UMNO, who is part of the ruling party now, has already know that the parliament is going to have the cabinet is going to fix the date of the parliament next week. So I think it's very interesting to see the political dynamics in few weeks to come. I think response straight away to your question, I think one should not look at the cooperation between PH, Pakatan Harapan, and Barisan Nasional as another coalition with parties pursuing a full slate of reforms of the coalition's ideology or reforms. I think it is a form cooperation of national unity government consisting of all major parties in the legislature, and it is usually formed during a time of war and national emergency. I think this is the type of the national government. If you reflect in the history, where the king asked Winston Churchill to lead during World War II, and David Lloyd George during World War I, and we have the Kuomintang and Communist national government joining together to fight the invading Japanese. I think history has shown this, and BN and PH have shown that we are on the same page on many principal issues during the budget debate last year, and now on the measures to deal with the pandemic and the post-COVID-19 economic recovery program. This cooperation is required because only PH and Barisan Nasional have the legitimacy to provide, I would say, stability during this period to deal with the pandemic, leaving aside ideologies and politics in this interim period. Well, after that, the both coalitions can go back to their respective ideologies to contest the next elections. And then I think only the full reform agenda can be put into place should PH elected in the next election.
Okay, how do you reconcile Harapan's possible cooperation with UMNO, sections of which are known to be corrupt and some of whose members hold extreme views to overthrow the current government? The problem is also one of trust, isn't it? When you know, I mean, people are just jostling here and there to form a new government. And then the one thing is the stability of the government. The other thing is how long can a government which is formed in this manner continue to be in power?
Yeah, I think I elaborate from what I have said earlier. Yeah, the Pakatan Harapan and Barisan Nasional and UMNO, I think will be able to form a government together based on understanding of the common goals, yeah, and objectives to achieve. All right. Such goals focus on the rakyat and their needs at the moment. We are not focusing on each party's own interests. We must rise above that, and for the new government to be effective and stable. I think the new norm now, Guna, is I put here the social trust. Yeah. This is the new norm now. Yeah. What is a social trust? I categorize into two: rakyat and rakyat, peoples and peoples. They have trust. The trust is very strong now. We have seen people's initiative of white flag and now black flag. And for me, this is an initiative by the peoples and people's relationship. But we have a problem now, peoples and leaders. And this is where the social trust, or I would say the trust deficit that happens between the society, the people, and also the leaders. Why? Because the leadership nowadays doesn't have the mandate from the people from the last election, period.
Okay. In that case, who will be the prime minister in a new coalition? Has that been actually decided? And can you get buy-in from all the parties for whoever the prime minister is going to be? Who will be the prime minister in your opinion?
Yeah, I depart from the key word of you mentioned just now, that is the stability. Yeah, right. To be stable, there must be a clear and firm leadership. And I think coming from me as the information chief of the party, which I'm not alone in this, there is a survey done by Sinaharian recently. Yeah, and we must center on the strength of Anwar leadership as the new prime minister. Why? Because we believe that Anwar has proven time and time again that he can bring together parties with such different views to work together to see a bigger picture and to achieve a pertinent goals for a particular point in time. And
do you see enough people supporting him as prime minister for this to happen?
Well, to have him as a prime minister, of course, he must have support from the majority. That's the constitutional provision. I think our former AG is going to agree with this.
From all the discussions so far, is that moving in that direction?
Well, if you talk about Pakatan Harapan and UMNO combined, I think we have 126 on paper.
But that also implies that does not take into account of indications that there may be a split within UMNO as well as to whether they want to support this arrangement.
Well, of course, when you talk about cooperation between the parties, the party has to decide whether the leaders in the party trying to break rank. I think that's a different issue. But I believe that UMNO, as an old party, they have certain disciplines. We'll see whether they're going to break rank or not. But I think I'm pretty sure, I'm an optimist, you see, because we have people's issue now that we need to deal with. So I don't think they're going to play more politics now.
Okay, thanks for that. I will bring in YB Howard Lee at the moment. Howard, with all the historical animosity between DAP and UMNO, what's the real chance of it working with UMNO? Because I mean, DAP is of course one of the dominant partners in Harapan. Or do you think this is just an expedient measure to gain control? Howard, can you unmute yourself, please?
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Thank you for inviting me to my fellow panelists. Good morning. I'd just like to respond before I go into the question proper from you to what was basically presented just now by my good friend and brother Sam. Of course, Sam and I are both in Majlis Presiden, the Presidential Council of Pakatan Harapan. Whilst in principle, I agree that there needs to be some form of a unity government if and when UMNO pulls out, and if and when there is a void of governance and a void of a government. But having both of us being members of the Presidential Council, I may not have gotten a memo. I don't think, in fact, I'm pretty sure there is no decision as of yet within PH to enter such a cooperation. I'm not saying I accept it or reject it, because that's a decision for Presidential Council to decide on. And of course, I take full cognizance and accept the decision thus far of Datuk Sri Anwar Ibrahim as our Prime Ministerial candidate, Prime Ministerial candidate, but I regret to say that I've not yet gotten the memo. I've not been part of that decision making of an official tie-up with of BN and PH. So I just need to make that clear. And I think let's go to the political dynamics of it. I must say that in public policy making or in governance, there's a term called policy sequencing, where one puts priorities one before the other in accordance to its need in vis-a-vis the current situation, right? We're at war. I don't know if people would agree with me, but we are at war, and we are at war with an enemy that is not found amongst the people and citizens of Malaysia, right? And in fact, it's a war that no one really knows where it is. You can't see it. And it is incumbent, atau dalam bahasa Melayunya, kita berkewajipan upon each and every single citizen, whether they are inclined with other political forces or non-political forces, BN, PH, whatever, to work with everyone, not to gain control, not to be at the top of the table, not to be at at the levers of power to distribute resources. We need to be able to work with everyone in order to face the challenges ahead, which is the current pandemic, which doesn't seem to be we can't seem to see the end of it. Number two, to get the fundamentals, the economy, the society back on track to what it should be, which I think we all have a consensus here that it is not anywhere near the track it needs to be. And then only we want to talk about levers of power and to go into elections, etc., etc. So I think that the primary thing, I agree with Vinod in his opening remarks. Hi, Vinod. Yes, we need to build or rebuild the nation, and we need nation builders. But I'd like to expand and elaborate on that. It shouldn't just be about building and rebuilding the nation. It should be people on the table to rebuild the nation, to rebuild our citizens, because without citizens, there is no nation. And essentially to rebuild at least the channels, the platforms, the foundations to rebuild our future. Because it shouldn't be just about now. It should be about the now and the future. And I think whether or not this is, whether or not we're talking about a marriage of convenience, or whether it's about, gaining control, one fundamental I would say basis upon whatever cooperation that's going to be coming, it needs to be one that gets rid of this toxic environment where politics is about talking about who's bad for the country, and we need to replace that with talking about and trying to realize what is good for the country.
True, but how in practical terms you have an impasse here,
Yeah.
and then you are looking towards another group of people taking control. That is the issue. And then we are wondering about how, say, a party like DAP and UMNO, who have been at loggerheads for decades, can they come back together and actually make this work? So we are talking about the practical terms of it.
Yes, I do not reject that at all. In fact, I embrace that. But whatever conversation, whatever cooperation that is put on the table, it must first be put on the table. And what is put on the table must first and foremost be an agenda base and a policy, a broad consensus based on policy agreements about what to put on the table and what is on the policy sequencing, right? I think let's agree that government and governance is about setting priorities about what needs to be done now, in 2 days, in a week, right? I think we agree with that. So what is that policy framework? What is to be put on the table?
What do you think it is?
Well, right now, I think it is very clear what our policy framework within Pakatan Harapan But of course, we don't have the numbers. I don't know whether we have, Pakatan Harapan in itself have enough numbers, because I haven't seen any defection into PH right now or in the last day or so. So as of right now, PH on our own, I don't see we have the numbers. However, which means that if there is to be another government or a change of government, meaning to remove the current prime minister with the new government to be put on the table, there needs to be addition of other members of parliament. What are they agreeing upon and what are they putting on the table, whether it's BN, whether it's UMNO, whether it's whatever party, whether it's PAS, whether it's Bersatu. What is on the policy table? We need to know that. And unless we know that, and there is a broad consensus that goes beyond 112 or 110, depending on what number you want to call the majority.
In other words, you're saying that DAP's participation will depend on what is put on the policy table. Is that right?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. If it is a continuation of the current situation, of course, we can't be part of that. Right?
So I mean, that will be perhaps involve some amount of negotiations as deciding who is prime minister, the cabinet, and so on and so forth. But that may come at a later point of time. At the moment, it looks like the change of government is the most important thing, you know, and it may be an expedient measure to gain control at the moment, but that is what the efforts seem to be focused on. So are you saying that DAP is not averse to this idea?
We don't reject it, but in order for us to accept it, we must know what the end game is. I state very clear that the nation is at a point of irreversible urgency to remove this government right now. Okay. But there is also another irreversible urgency to solve the problems of the people. And I'm sorry to pull on heartstrings here, but before I came into this forum, I was out doing surveys with my team of finding out, on top of the 500 nasi bungkus that we're distributing, how many more do we need? And apart from the first MCO, we have never seen the nation at its feet, literally at its knees, as bad as we are now. People are literally suffering and crying of hunger. Do we even fathom the urgency that we are facing as a nation right now? Those who are at their ivory towers in Putrajaya, of course they don't know, because we don't see real help coming for that.
Probably the people do, but the government does not. No?
But it's not a matter of probability. They definitely don't know, right? But never mind. If they don't want to deal, they don't want to govern, we are doing it on the ground. But the fact is, if we are to be part of or participate in the change of government, we need to know what is on the table.
I think maybe if we go back to what Dato Sri Samshul said earlier, he's talking about sort of like a unity government to deal with this crisis. And then when elections come, you all go your own separate ways again. Is that workable?
I absolutely agree with that. But to form a government, you must know what you are to do. A unity government cannot be something that is based on just the word unity and just based on faith.
But right now, I think that will be unity against COVID-19. You know?
Absolutely. Absolutely. But let me just expand on the word unity. I mean, I'm not a lawyer, I'm a lawmaker. But when you're talking about words, COVID, unity against COVID, are we including Bersatu? Are we including Azmin? Are we including PAS, GPS, Warisan? So I think this needs to be expanded, and a certain degree, a big degree of transparency needs to be out there.
Yeah, that's a good point. You know, and also, can politicians actually come together to work towards a common purpose, common enemy in this case?
And if you would allow me, I don't like drawing on foreign and old experiences, but the 30 years immediately after the Second World War, Germany saw 30 years of its most prosperous and most developmentally successful years, 3 decades of prosperity. Why? From 1966 onwards, you had basically the CDU-CSU government where, SPD was pulled in. And then after that, 69, you had Willy Brandt, which also formed a broad consensus-based essentially a grand coalition government. Now, the reason why this 30 years was successful and was because there was a grand coalition where it pulled in the right, pulled into left, pulled in the center, and it was a broad consensus about what the nation was going to be, what the people was going to be helped to achieve, and it was a future building government where everyone was in based on the policy consensus that took 3 weeks worth of negotiation, at least in 1969. So what I'm trying to say here is, we can't just say, oh, it's a unity government and just put the agenda by the wayside. The unity agenda needs to be an agenda that is transparent. Only then will we have a clear course of action to adhere to achieve unity.
Yeah, I mean, many other countries around the world seem to have workable coalition governments, but we don't. Okay. Thanks, Howard. Moving on. Dr. Aflin, what's your sense of the situation at the ground level? What do you think people want? Do they want Muhyiddin's government still, or a new one?
Okay, thank you, Speaker, and all. Wait, first of all, can I just say this? We have been on the ground for the past couple of months, and first of all, I would say that a lot of people really are lost. Yeah, and for me to actually see every day people suffering and so on, and we have conversations about this with them, they really don't care about what you guys are talking about right now. Really, there's a lot, and the politics, and you might as well be speaking German to them right now, right? Because first of all, this is just my basic understanding. Yeah, when the Darurat was announced, there was nobody came out to tell the Rakyat what the Darurat is. You know, I mean, the learned and, you know, the people who are interested in this, and probably people in the urban areas, they will look for it and try and find out what Darurat is, right? And so then they can put 2 and 2 together or whatever. But in general, you know, the people at the PPRs and so on, they don't know, you know. So like what happens in a darurat, and what are their rights? What can they do? What are we just sitting ducks just waiting for everybody else to decide our fate? This is what they are feeling outside, you know, on the ground. And this general consensus right now, what people are focused on is like what maybe Howard was saying, is pretty much just survival. They're looking at how we're gonna survive this, you know, get us to a place where we can survive, get us to a place where we can actually, you know, not worry about where our next meal is gonna come from, you know. And there are loads of these people, and the people are you know, and they, like I said, they're lost. They cannot, they don't know where to turn to, you know. And yeah, whenever there's like the white flag issue coming up, there was suddenly you know, an influx of people helping out. And to me, that was one of the greatest show of unity I've seen in a long time. Being out there, going to the flats, going to places where it's about to go PKPD and so on, we really see that, you know, it's for this moment in time, just forget about the politics, forget about everything, and just focus on humanity. And the thing about that is, this is what is going to win over the Rakyat. This is what is really important to the Rakyat right now, to see who are these people that are coming to aid us during this time of need, right? So my general feeling from what I get from talking to the people as an NGO, that we do social service and so on, is the fact that they are angry, they feel betrayed. You know, I think one of the reason is they made a decision. They all came out to get a government, and then suddenly the government was changed again, out of their control. They had no say, to like, we didn't ask for this government. The government that we wanted, we chose that government. Right now, what happened? Why did you give me this government? We never chose this government.
So
right?
under such circumstances, they can't really be happy with the situation.
Yes, they're so unhappy with it. I mean, not like, look, people who are into politics, they will be talking politics, right? Oh, we are better than these guys. No, these guys are better. So, but right now, the hatred for politics and politician on the ground, is at an all-time high.
Yeah.
Because it feels to them, because nothing has ever been explained to them. Like what you guys are doing right now, you're explaining what this is. But before it happens, for example, why wasn't there a PSA saying this is what darurat is? Darurat for dummies, and whatever that needs to get done to explain a decision that's going to be made.
Okay.
And then,
So under these circumstances, would they be more receptive to a change in government, or would they consider that as something which would be even more disruptive?
I think what they are really, really interested is who can better the situation, who can make their situation better. Is it a coalition government? Is it whatever? I don't think they really care. What they really care about is who can take us out of this darkness and bring us back into the light. We need people who really care, and really, really, that's a basic thing. If you care, they will care back, and in there's no two ways about it, and again, people are dying, people are suffering, people are, I've been to war-ravaged and war-torn countries, and where I visit refugee camps, and like I shared this story yesterday, and I saw people with there's groups of refugees, no food and so on, and I once thought to myself, I said, wow, I'm so lucky living in Malaysia, because this doesn't happen in my country, because there's always somebody to take care of someone, and we wish that this doesn't happen on our fellow countrymen. But alas, what I've seen in the last month is things are slowly deteriorating towards it. And Malaysians not having food is just like, it doesn't make any sense.
That's actually very frightening.
It's very frightening. This is like, it's like something I saw, and suddenly it was a foreshadowing of what is going to happen, and suddenly it's happening in my country. So I think to those to those people who've been outside and who've been like doing NGO work, they know that what's happening now right here right now in our country is similar to what we see outside, where people are suffering, and we are afraid because we know where it can go, and it needs to be stopped. It needs somehow, the change has to happen really quick, and I feel the sooner people put their hearts in front and put their their greed or whatever behind, I think something can be achieved.
I think Sam.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead, Sam.
I mean, I think that's the whole idea of this government trying to stop the parliament from sitting. I think their strategy is to make sure that people are not being informed, which I believe is a very wrong strategy. You see, John Stuart Mills once said that the parliament, the legislature, is supposed to be the congress of opinion, that we can put forward our discussion for the benefit of the people. So if you stop all the forums of discussion, we end up having parliament here in the webinar. So that's the problem here.
Yeah. Because see, I've been doing a little campaign where we show the suffering of the people, just people just asking for help, and then at the end of it, there's a tagline we put, which is "Buka Parlimen sekarang," and which means, so some people are going, you're showing the suffering of people. What has it got to do with Buka Parlimen sekarang? That's the thing. Even that concept, for those who understand that for this to be solved, you need to open the parliament. You need to have that discussion. You need to have those debates happening so that they can address the issues that we see beforehand. These people asking for help and so on. So, but even to a layman, they will not get it. They say, why is it, just say we need help. Yeah. But how do you get that help to them? Is by getting the parliament open. But that also needs to be addressed and also needs to be told to the people that, hey, to get this for you, the parliament needs to be open. So that's why they say, I don't care lah. You do whatever you want lah. You open the parliament or don't open the parliament. Just get us help. For them, it's just that. It's just black and white for them, But of course, there's a process to get to where you want to go. But we need to educate the rakyat about this, and somehow, But I agree with what IB said, because they do whatever they do as they like, right? And they don't actually explain why they're doing certain things. Why is the rollout of the vaccine so slow? And people are going like, why can't I get a vaccine? Why? Explain to the people, and people, especially Malaysians and Asians, we're very understanding. If you can explain to us something, we can actually try and grasp the concept and maybe accept it or not. But
communication has really not been very great from the government regarding all this issues.
And I think what YB is saying is very true. It's purposeful. That means they are really doing that so that, and it's back to like, I would say a communist government, which I tell you what to do, you just do. And, for one of a better analogy, but it's pretty much that you just do what we ask you to do. And and everybody and the people are supposed to take it. Now, if the wheel, if something is not broken, there's nothing to fix, right? But the problem is, right now, what's happening is there is some huge problems happening, and that's why people are, and what happened with the last PRU was an emotional, how do you say? It was just people feeling that they needed change, right? People feeling that that's it, enough is enough. And we are heading towards this again. We are heading towards enough is enough again. The white flags are going out and people are really needing help. And I really, really, Malay we say we tabik lah, people who are out there helping out every single, like YB Howard said, he was just doing, and this is what it's about. It's about putting the people first.
Right. Thanks very much for that, Dr. Flynn. Before we go on to round two, I think Vinod wants to say something. Vinod?
Unmute microphone.
Unmute.
We still can't hear you. Have you unmuted?
This is the new norm. Learn how to unmute.
Okay, sorry.
All right. Can hear you now.
Okay, good. All right. Look, I'm sorry. I just needed to jump in for a bit because I'm hearing what Howard was saying and addressing what Shamsul was saying. Can we just be clear here? Putting aside the, excuse my language, bullshit of politics. We all know what's going on. DAP has a problem. They're grassroots. Hate UMNO, right? Historical. So whatever DAP leadership they need to do, they need to work out how are they going to sell it to the grassroots, I think. Okay, I mean, and perhaps for very good reason. I mean, I'm not being a great supporter of UMNO historically, so we can understand that. On the Pakatan Harapan side as a whole, look, the new reality is things have gone to pot. The new reality is we need to work out how to save this country. And I would just like to give this description of this that I've given often about this beautiful house we built, 1957 and then 1963, called Malaysia. This beautiful house, designed, architecture, everything is lovely. And then over the years, we kept expanding it. But what we didn't pay attention to was to the rot, to the termites. We just kept putting nice, extensions, nice glass. And every time something was broken, we put a Band-Aid around it and temporarily fix it. Mahathir Mohamad came in and he put more glass, more frames, more glitter. Again, leaving the rot. Termites were not taken care of. We've now reached a stage where this house is about to collapse. It is going to collapse. We have a choice. Either we're inside the house when it collapses on top of us, or we move out, tear the freaking house down, and build a new house for Malaysia today. And Malaysia today means we all have to sacrifice. DAP will have to sacrifice. And look, I need to look at the bigger picture. PKR, Amana all have to sacrifice. UMNO has to sacrifice, because UMNO will undoubtedly have the same problem that DAP has, to say, well, oh, DAP is our enemy. We can never work with DAP. But the reality is, if we're going to save this country, that nonsense of the past has to put aside. It's not about supporting Najib or Zahid. It's not about dealing with the judiciary. It's got nothing to do with this. It's dealing with parties. Who's the president here? Who's the president? And what do we need to do to move forward? And I just wish politicians would, and I think, give enough credit to the public for not being stupid, that enough credit to the public to understand, look, we know what's going on. Would you guys please get your act together and just do what we need you to do, what this country now needs? I'm sorry, I just had to throw it out there, because, you know, we can go on this polemic of, you know, what's on the table, what's not on the table. And, you know, Shamsul can say we want a unity government, etc. You know, we need to put aside everything and decide how we're going to move forward for this country. And I will agree with Dr. Sri Shamsul. This is a need for a unity government, not the unity government suggested by Mahathir Mohamad, where basically he wanted to be emperor, but a unity government that everyone comes and says, look, we have to save the country now. We have to deal with this now. We will fight each other, we'll rip each other's heads off when election comes. But until then, we need to save our nation. Sorry, Gunnar, back to you.
Thank you. Thanks, Vinod. Now, the round two is about democracy and the rule of law. And back to Tan Sri Thomas.
Gunnar, could
Yeah.
we just kind of not necessarily respond to, carry on from what Vinod had to say?
I think we also want to talk about democracy and the rule of law. We will come back to that later when we are wrapping up. So, the second part of it, the round two, is that, so about Tan Sri Thomas, going back to him, you were Attorney General from 2018 to 2020, some 20 months, when Harapan formed the government and talked about legal reform. If you were AG during the last 16 months or so, what would you have done differently?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I think the 16 months which has elapsed since 1st March last year, when the Moeddin government came into power, must be seen against the background of COVID. And I think that is uppermost. And I think you've heard from all our panelists of the actual problems that Malaysians are facing. So at this point of time, what I would have said would have been, you asked me specifically, what would I have done if I had been in power, in office? First of all, I would have not advised, I would have advised against emergency. I would have advised for Parliament to continuously sit. It wouldn't be time for reform of laws. That takes a back seat. But what I would have focused on was to try and deal with the health and economic issues. Because as AG, you have a wide gamut. And I found that my advice was often listened to. It's okay to advise. They can reject it, but if you give constructive advice, people will listen. So what I would have done would have been very early on, within a month of, let's say by March, April, and COVID was happening when we were leaving office, it would have been very clear that the solution is vaccines. And I would have advised the Prime Minister to form a small committee of the Health Minister, the Finance Minister, and of course I would like to be there as lawyer, and to start looking for vaccines, because it is predictable. This is not the first disease that has hit the globe. It will not be the last. It is predictable that vaccines would be the solution. And the idea, and again, common sense would tell you that, look, there are 8 billion people in the world who need vaccines, and there will be a mismatch between supply and demand. And so we have to be smart. We have to quickly go and get deals with the top 10 pharmaceutical companies of the world, pay deposits if need be, so that we are first in the line. And we would do it openly, transparently. There will be no question of leakages. There'll be no kickbacks. There'll be no hanky-panky. We will be announcing every now and then. And if we had done that in March or April or May, we would have been in the class of countries that have done well. Israel, USA, UK are good examples of vaccines coming first. And it wasn't rocket scientists who decided that. So that is what I would have focused on, getting vaccines and contracts for vaccines. The other thing that I would have done would have been to focus on the financial aspects and the health aspects. And my position is that all these things that have happened to Malaysia, Malaysians, are caused by the state, by the executive branch, by the government, because it is the government that has told the private sector, millions of Malaysians, stop work, don't come to work, don't exercise, don't do this, don't do that. So they have been a negative force which has, after 15 months, killed the economy without improving the health, and has caused social and health problems. All those policies were wrong policies. So we've had really terrible, terrible governance. Now, I know Aflin quite rightly said on behalf of Malaysians that, look, politicians cause us the problem. I agree. It's the politicians who've caused the problem, and that is why they are so hated. All the people of Malaysia who are suffering really dislike the 220 MPs. You don't know how much you are disliked, because you have caused the problem of trying to solve medical and sciences by taking terrible decisions. And I would end by saying that a lot of others have talked about, how could this happen to Malaysia? And I can remember my late father telling me about the Japanese occupation and how Malayans had to eat tapioca. According to my dad and his generation of people, you couldn't get rice in Malaya during the Japanese occupation of 41 to 45, and people were dying. And we've reached that stage. And why have we reached that stage? Because of mismanagement, mishandling, and terrible policies by the policymakers. Thank you.
Sorry. Thanks for that, Tommy. Now, just something about the party hopping. Tan Sri Pandikar, probably Sabah has had more changes in government than anywhere else. Let's say by unsavory means. As a lawyer yourself and a long-time politician from Sabah, can you think of ways that a situation such as this can be avoided? And should we have a mechanism to stop party hopping through legislation, for instance? Can you unmute yourself, Tan Sri? You are still muted. Can you unmute yourself?
You typed it in the message to all.
Okay.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes, okay, thank you very much. Tuan Pengerusi, before I answer that specific question, allow me to respond briefly to the statement of the former Attorney General just now pertaining to the issue of vote of no confidence in Parliament. He stated that Speaker can exercise his discretion by quoting the Constitution and he gives examples that has been done in some other countries. Now, let me remind the former Attorney General that the standing orders of Parliament are actually made pursuant to Article 62 to 1 of the Constitution. So in my interpretation of that is that the standing order of Parliament actually is the extension arm of the Constitution. If a Speaker of the day were to give ruling, and the ruling was based on some other laws outside whatever it is, I will have riots if I were the Speaker in the Majlis or in the House, because they will be saying that they said, Mr. Speaker, sir, what standing order that we're using now? Then they will go out from the chamber. So I would like to see one day an interpretation of the kind that is given by the Attorney General will sit there as a speaker. I personally would love to see a former Attorney General like the mind of Tony Thomas would sit there and preside. Now, thank you very much. Now, in answer to your question, Datuk Ngurusi, isa Sabahan, I'm a little bit slighted by those words. Saya terkesan sedikit. You know, I read these words. Sabah has had more changes in government than anyone else by unsavory means. Unsavory means perkara yang tidak elok. The word seems to imply that Sabahan politics are dirty, immoral, unethical, or undemocratic. Again, bukan saya saja, mungkin semua Sabahan juga terkesan dengan statement ini. To me, party hopping is exercised by those concerned in accordance to their constitutional rights, i.e., freedom of speech and freedom of association. It is not against the Constitution. It has been tried that a former state government tried to pass law, anti-hope law. It was declared unconstitutional by the courts. And why are you talking about this now?
But Tan Sri, say if you stand under one party and then barely a few days later after the elections, you hop to another party, what would you call it? Not unsavory?
Okay, if that word unsavory, if you are referring to food, of course. But if you are referring to politics, that is in accordance to our constitution, then I don't think that is the proper words, because we are talking here about democracy. We are not talking about food.
Okay, now we'll agree to disagree on that, but go ahead, thanks.
Okay, thank you. Tuan Pengerusi, you might be interested to know that this culture of political hopping was taught to Sabahan by our political guru from Malaya. Let me give you an example. For example, when the Osno government under the leadership of Datuk Mustafa Harun, he was then, were too strong and not in tune with the Kuala Lumpur politics. Leaders in Osno were enticed by the political taipan from Malaya to hop out from Osno and form another party, Berjaya, sponsored by KL political taipan to topple Osno government. In Osno was toppled by Berjaya in 1976 election. You must remember, when you talk about hoping, it is not only hoping in, you must also talk about hoping out. Now, another example was when Datuk Pairin, a prominent Kadazan leader in Berjaya, had a political rift with his president and chief minister, then Datuk Aris Saleh. Datuk Pairin hoped out from Berjaya, a party that was in government, to form his own political party, PBS. The Parti Bersatu then was out from Barisan Nasional. Kuala Lumpur decided to take sides of Datuk Aris in Berjaya. Now, Datuk Pengerusi, the words of political taipan from Malaya, sing and swim with Berjaya, still rings in the ear of every Sabahan politician till now. In spite of that strong support, PBS toppled Berjaya government in 1985 election. Political interference never stopped there, but PBS won again and snapped the election in 1986. As PBS was unstoppable by local parties, UMNO were brought into Sabah. All politicians in Sabah, including those in PBS then, were enticed to hop into UMNO. Of course, with its might, UMNO managed to tame PBS by unsavory means, through carrot and sticks, melalui lampu merah dan tongkat methods. A number of PBS leaders left PBS and joined in Barisan Nasional UMNO. PBS has to rejoin again Barisan Nasional. Tuan Pengerusi, if you care to study the political culture of party hopping in Sabah, you will find out that that culture originated from Malaya.
I don't disagree with you there. But,
okay, thank you very much for agreeing. Let me finish my point.
Okay, sure.
Now this party hopping begins to rear its ugly head in Malaya. My question here is, are Malayan politicians now learning from Sabah politics? Tuan Pengerusi, don't just blame the party hoppers in Sabah. The guru-guru politics from Malaya, through their invisible hand, interfering in Sabah's politics, should be equally blamed, if not more. Tuan Pengerusi, party hopping, in my opinion, is triggered by so many factors. Antara lain, one, by carrot and stick politics. And I think you should understand that. The panelists all understand this. B, by unsavory pressures by those in power. Now, a prominent UMNO politician in Kelantan hoped in another party in Pakatan Harapan government due to unsavory political means. I like that word, Tuan Pengurusi, unsavory. C, by succumbing to the demand of the supporters to provide them with development. You can provide development in your constituency if you are in the opposition, Tuan Pengurusi. Now, this is a difference between a representative representing urban areas than a representative representing the kampung. Because the kampung problem is a basic problem, infrastructure problem. The problem in the urban areas are luxury problem, mind problem. You define democracy. We don't even understand what is democracy all about. So you must make a difference there. The list of reasons I can give on and on. Party hopping can be avoided. However, you can minimize with the following measures, in my opinion. One, if you want to do it by legislation, the law must not be penalizing the would-be party hoppers only. Because you must remember, when you hop from one party to another party, the reason of your hopping sometimes is not known to those people who are giving the opinion towards your action. In my opinion, the law must make other parties behind the party hopping also responsible. I'm talking about invisible hands. For example, if the hopping was as a result of succumbing to pressure for being unable to provide development in his constituency, if you were to stay in the opposition, this type of category of party hopping can be stopped or minimized by passing law to make it mandatory for the ruling party to give the required budget to the opposition wakil rakyat for development in their constituency. Now, if there was a new government formed similar to the one that we have now, you must make sure whoever the prime minister of the day must listen to the voices of the rakyat. When you talk about the rakyat of Malaysia, they are not rakyat in the urban areas, also rakyat in the kampung. Now I see that Pengurusi, when I sit in this webinar, I can feel it, that what we're discussing here now is conditioning the head of the rakyat of Malaysia that we should be forming a new government, that the government of the day is not a legitimate government because it was never voted in by the rakyat. I disagree with that. I will state it again in my closing remark. Now, number two, stop the carrot and stick politics practiced by those in power. Now, this carrot and stick politics, it is in so many dimensions. Sometimes you are being pressurized just because you didn't pay your income tax. And those people in political powers use this. As the Malay proverb says, bertepuk tangan sebelah tidak akan berbunyi. You see, there is no wakil rakyat that will hope in any political party that is in government. If assuming the US, there was no enticement, there was no carrot and stick tactics that is used. Number three, stop the divide and rule politics practiced by those in power for their own practical agenda. Tuan Pengurusi, this divide and rule politics is rampantly applied or used in Sabah by the guru-guru politik Permaraya. And I think you understand that. This divide and rule politics. Four, stop the culture of political bullying. Now in Malaysia, this political bullying is happening. Nobody's talking about it. What I mean by political bullying is this: the practice by the grouping of big parties such as Barisan Nasional, Pakatan Harapan, and Perikatan Nasional. This political culture of banding together big political parties in order to achieve their common or shared objective does not give chance to small political parties led by capable politicians with high political morale to win any election. Now, this must be reviewed back. This concept of big political parties grouped together in order to bully those small political parties. That is the reason why in Malaysia, no small political parties led by key people, leaders who have high morality never win elections.
Okay.
Tuan Pengurusi, I disagree with the legislation that curtail political hopping for one main reason. Not that I like this idea of political hopping. The main reason why I am against such a legislation to curtail this is that it destroys the very core of the spirit of democracy. That is freedom of speech and freedom of association.
Yeah,
court declared that so many times.
I agree with a lot
Thank
of
you.
things that you're saying, and some of your points are
Thank you, Tuan
actually,
Pelosi.
yeah, are actually very valid. But the thing is, I mean, however, I think for the country as a whole, you cannot have a situation where governments are constantly being changed because of them hopping from one party to the other for no reason at all, but to overthrow the other government. There is no change in ideology. There's no nothing, you know. So I think to use the freedom of association argument for that is a bit tenuous. But yes, we agree with a lot of your suggestions. All right, thanks. Thank you for that. Dato Sri Samshul, now over to you. How would a government comprising PKR, Amanah, DAP, and elements from UMNO function? How much space for democratic reform and commitment to reform would there be to make real changes towards democracy and rule of law in such a government? Or is this only going to be an interim government?
Yeah, thank you very much. Well, some of them I have mentioned it earlier, but I think I just want to reiterate that, well, as for democratic reforms and structural reforms, I think that will always remain an important agenda for PH and also Keadilan. But I think the immediate goals of the new government, of course, led by Dato' Sri Anwar, is to bring down the COVID cases and improve vaccination numbers and ease the rakyat of their suffering. I think the focus will be on the welfare of the rakyat and their health and their livelihood. Certainly will be the main focus. But all of which will be done in a manner that ensures accountability and also transparency. Thus, while addressing the welfare and needs of the rakyat, we will also concurrently be improving the government's internal process and practice, which certainly will pave the way towards democratic reforms. So I think this is the key thing. Well, people have been questioning whether this cooperation has something to do with individuals in UMNO, but I think in this kind of cooperation, it's not dealing with individuals or the factions of the ruling of UMNO or other ruling party component. It will be dealing with UMNO as a party or party positions. Hence, therefore, the issue of individual corruption, if people who raise that, should be dealt with according to the rule of law. But I think as of now, all the leaders in Pakatan Harapan, of course, also in UMNO in particular, we are all concerned. If you see from the posting in Facebook and social media, we are certainly concerned with the welfare of the people now. I think recently the police department has issued a very worrying statistic on those who are committing suicide. I think from January until May, we have already reached 500 people that made a decision to commit suicide. But I think if allow this for a year, it may exceed 1,000, it may exceed more. But what are the government, what are the ministries focus on that, offers their help and offers their assistance? I think this is something not we want to play for a long time. People is dying, they need help, and of course we need to come very early. We need to forget whatever history that we have. Let's focus on bringing back this nation into the right track.
Okay, thank you for that.
Welcome.
Going on to Howard. Now, Howard, I think there's an opportunity for you to go back to the points that you were trying to make earlier, but I will just add to that these questions. What will it take to look beyond narrow racial and religious interests, which actually undermine democracy and rule of law in Malaysia? This is, after all, necessary for democracy and the rule of law to take root. Would it take a generational change for your generation to take over before this happens?
Thank you. I just kind of go back to just give a brief, not respond, but to add on to what Vinod said. I agree, cut the bullshit. Absolutely. We absolutely need to cut the bullshit. So therefore, I speak and respond with previous actions taken by by DAP and Harapan in my state. We're talking about a big house, but let's talk about now an annex of the house. DAP along with Pakatan Harapan Perak, if you're speaking in the context of whether it's working with previous adversaries or current adversaries that have long history of adversariness, if there is a word, in Perak, with the removal of the previous Menteri Besar, transitioning into the current Menteri Besar, yeah, we took sacrifices, we took hittings on the ground, but a sacrifice and a decision was made to give support in response to a confidence in supply that was all-encompassing for all 59 members of the August House of the Perak State Legislative Assembly. So I'm not speaking from a theoretical castle in the sky example of having done that. I'm speaking from experience of having done that in Perak. So there is no issue of not willing to take sacrifices and taking a beating and a hitting from the grassroots. And I'm saying this with confidence that I am still very much so serving. So I think I agree. Whether it's the big house or an annex of the house, everyone has to take a beating for the country, for the nation, for the people, and for the future. So, there is no question on whether or not we are willing to take a beating for the country. But to how do we narrow, or how do you close the gap between the promises of our ideals and the reality of our time, and how to get away from this kind of racial, religious, ethnocentric, kind of toxic environment that we're in now? I think fundamentally what we need to do right now is again, I can't stress it, put the nation, put the citizens, the people, and the future as our agenda. Okay, amongst them is, rather than, again, I repeat, it's not about what's bad for the country, because what I see certain things as bad is actually good for someone else. But let's come to a broad consensus of what is good and needed for the country. So things like increase in spending, extra spending by the federal government to spur the economy once again, putting our absolute focus on getting vaccines out there. You know, when you talk about these things that everyone understands that memang dapur dah kosong, peti sejuk dah tak ada makan. I mean, it's about getting the economy so that people have a job and have food to eat. Putting focus on that. Putting focus on, you know, I'll give you an example. My father and my mother basically registered to be vaccinated at the same time. My father got vaccinated 3 weeks ago, and my mother only just got her notice today. And we're still seeing, despite the fact that in Perak, in Ipoh, we're into kind of getting 60 or below vaccinated. But I still have, on a day-to-day basis, 3, 5, 10 people coming who are in their 70s who are still not vaccinated. So putting the agenda of prioritizing and widening the scope of vaccination by increasing PPVs or vaccination centers, increasing the number of vaccinations per day by achieving more vaccination centers.
But the problem is lack of vaccines, isn't it, in this case?
Well, that's coming within this week or so, right? I'm not going to go into the semantics of should have negotiated, they should have got into the market sooner, they should have cornered the market by putting an order in first. I'm not going to go into that. But what I'm saying is the priority is vaccine and food for the people. The secondary is how to get the economy back by getting people jobs, by putting more money and injecting more fiscal stimulus into the market. Right.
In a sort of a way, you need Parliament to actually reconvene, because you cannot spend more than 60%. You can't borrow more than 60% of debt. The limit is 60% of GDP has got to be the limit for debt. So that needs to be approved by the Parliament.
Absolutely.
And you need probably like a bipartisan approach to the whole thing. I mean, what do you think that would work?
Yes, it would work, but I hate to sound like the doomsayer and the bringer of bad news here. Now, I am in absolute agreement that Parliament must sit, but Parliament must sit in its full vigor with its full powers as the august house of the highest policy-making chamber in the country. Now, we know that for too long that we talk about who's subservient to who. right now we see that Parliament is subservient to government. But a real Westminsterial system is where the government is subservient to Parliament, right? So that is a bit cerebral. I don't want to talk about that. But the fact is, right now, under the emergency ordinance and also what is provided in the Federal Constitution, Article 1507, actually says that even from the expiration of the last day of the emergency, the effects and the ordinances promulgated during the period of emergency still has 6 months of, it still has 6 months breathing space, which means it still applies. No one is talking about that. I mean, I've written about it. It was published at the Vibes. But the fact is, with this, which gives me the fear, I would say, I mean, please, Tan Sri Tommy, correct me if I'm wrong, Ordinance 151, PUA 151, which is the amendment to Ordinance 1 that added clause 10B, 10A and 10B, whereby essentially all expenditure by the government can bypass parliamentary scrutiny and passage, as well as all Menteri Besar, all chief ministers and the treasury can literally circumvent all treasury procedures and all monetary and fiscal procedures, and they can just approve what the hell they want. Now, okay, fine. If you're talking about this as a real emergency, I don't agree with it, but I can understand it. But the fact is, who is going to be talking about buying the second round of vaccines after the term of protection has ended? We need to be starting to buy the second round of vaccines through public money by 2022, right? Where's the money going to come from? This needs to be discussed in Parliament. If Parliament is turned into a lame duck or preserved to be a lame duck Parliament just as a talk shop without real powers, then, the government still has absolute power. So the first thing I would say that the Parliament has to do, and whatever new government is, when Parliament sits, there needs to be an agreement that a motion to both houses to be voted on is a motion to revoke and annul all ordinances. So Parliament is restored into its rightful place. So, I would really love to seek the opinion of Tan Sri Thomas and Tan Sri Pandika on whether or not the government and the law minister and the speakers will allow for such a motion, considering the fact that Duli Yang Maha Mulia Perdana Seri Yang di-Pertuan Agong telah pun bertitah for a motion of such effect to be discussed in Parliament. Is that going to be allowed?
Okay, I think there's some of that may be covered in the questions. We are running out of time here. Let's move on to Dr. Aflin and then take a few questions. We are already into part of the question time. So Aflin, do you think we as a nation are ready for what it takes to achieve true democratic reform, which goes beyond mere one man, one vote, which gives everyone a voice and a place in this country of ours?
The pandemic has shown us one thing, that change is inevitable. You have to change. And in people who are used to living a certain way have realized they can't live that way anymore. We have to change, right? And again, we see that there's something broken. We see that something needs to be done. That's why the reform needs to happen. And I do believe it has to happen. Democratic reforms have to happen. And the only way, I think, the best way for that to happen is to let the people get a little bit more engaged and more involved in this. Get them to actually be a part of this whole political machinery and get them also believing in the political machinery. I think there was a saying that I've heard before that, when good people don't do politics because they don't believe it or whatever, then the bad people will come in and do politics, right? So pretty much we need to get the faith of the people again in politics and to say that this works. The politics work for you. And that's why we need to come out again. And if it's by matter of voting or by matter of speaking out loudly, the movement, the birthday movement, for example, where there are hundreds of thousands and people believing in a cause, And right now, you know, the only reason why people are not on the streets is because there's MCO, there's PKPD. They can't be on the streets. But believe you me, if there was no such thing, there will be people on the streets right now.
Okay.
You know, and people are demanding that something is changed. You know, that right now, please look at us again. Let us be the number one priority. Yes, of course. I agree with what Howard has said just now, because it's something very important. Because besides addressing what's important now, which is the vaccines and the food and so on, what needs to be addressed is this: we are slowly losing our middle income group, and
Okay.
as we all know, this is what drives our nation, right?
Perhaps this pandemic will drive us together and actually enhance the unity among all of us as Malaysians.
At the moment, Guna, I believe it has done that. But what it's done is it's created this huge hatred towards what's you know, the government or the powers that be that are dictating, you know. And again, when there's no parliament open, it's not their representative speaking or debating. It's again, you're deciding on my behalf. You know what happens to me, and you're deciding on my behalf now because what you've decided, I don't have a job. You know, because what you've decided, I can't pay my bills. My house is being taken away. You know, so again, we must start to create belief in the people, in the system, in the democratic system that we have, and why politics is really important. That people must be a part of politics and understand. And for that to happen, the other things that right now that are worrying them must be addressed. And like what I said, we're losing our middle income group, right? And the middle income is what is driving our economy. If we lose that, and all these people start to lose their small businesses, start to lose work, and become, you know, not everybody, like if in the UK, I think maybe they go on the dole or whatever, you know. But what I'm saying is, we can't afford to do that right now. We're already spending so much money, and if we don't have that middle income, there's nothing to drive it back up.
Yeah.
You know, and I mean, this is me as a layman trying to make sense of things, but this is what I fear for the future. Whatever government that comes in has a monumental task of trying to rebuild this country after this.
Yeah, that's true.
We see Trump, you know, Trump was not a well-liked president, but of course, he won the hearts of half the country. And but what happened is he didn't address the problem of the COVID. And what Biden did when he took power, I mean, Democrats are not perfect, but what he did was straight away address the issue of the pandemic. And you know what? Whatever whatever things that people don't like about Biden or whatever, suddenly it's like that doesn't matter. You've addressed the main issue that's important in my life right now. That I can go out and spend my life normalish. You know, it's not normal anymore, but I can actually go have a coffee with my friend. I can do whatever because you did your job, you know, and you did. So the approval rating for Biden has increased, you know, regardless before whatever people think of it, you know. So it's action taken for the people, and people will forgive all the small things.
At the end of the day, the government will be judged by what it does, you know, and how effective it is. Let's take some questions now. Can we have question one up now? Okay, this is a question to Dato Sri Samshul. How is this unity government different from the one that Tun Dr. Mahathir proposed? Dato Sri?
Yeah, sorry. Yes, thank you very much for the question. I think this question has been answered a bit briefly by Dato Vinod just now, where he mentioned that this unity government will be different from what Mahathir has proposed. Well, I think there are two angles or two approaches to this question. First, what is the sense of the purpose for this unity government? We know that during Mahathir's time, the unity government is to unite, still based on the racial block. Yeah, it's not because we have advanced to the multiracial politics after Pakatan Harapan being given the mandate, but when we sense that Bersatu is trying to avoid the dynamic of multiracial, that's the idea of unity of government comes to the play. So this is what we think that it is not feasible in that context of the Malaysian politics during that time. But as of now, there is certainly a sense of purpose, where it is not based on race, it's based on the important needs that we're having now. That the purpose of this government is to ensure that the government that was elected before being back on track. And of course, we have given this sort of unmandated government run for the past, 15 months or 16 months under this new Perikatan Nasional, and they are heading nowhere. You see, they are starting with emergency, trying to stop the parliament. Well, of course, at the point of time, we can see the popular support of Prime Minister Mahathir, where everyone believed that this is the right thing. But of course, people are expecting that the result be very good to them. Yeah. But after 6 months, we can see how the situation get worse. I think that's my take on that. Thank you.
Okay. Let's move on to the next question. All right. This goes to anyone who wants to answer. How can a new government, other than the PN, improve the vaccination rate compared to the present rate? Open question to anyone?
Can I say something, Mr. Moderator?
Sure. Tan Sri, go ahead.
When we are talking about vaccination, which I think we all accept, the entire globe accepts that is the immediate solution to the problem, however good the solution may be and however effective. There are two aspects to that. One is the acquisition of the vaccines, where there is tremendous demand and not enough supply, and all the countries are fighting for it. So that's acquisition. And then secondly, administration of vaccines, assuming you've got it. So for me, what I would say is that when we are talking of a war footing, and there are any number of examples in many countries, including Malaysia, where we say it's dealing with COVID is like war. What we ought to have done was to take that analogy one step further and say that once the vaccines have come, the government medical services, the public sector should have gone into alliance with the private medical sector, so that all the hospitals of Malaysia, all the clinics of Malaysia, all the doctors and nurses and paramedical are all on the war footing, and we should have all the school halls and other places where we should have vaccinations done on a daily basis for 24 hours, so that the objective would be to administer the vaccination within 1 month. And we only have 35 million people. And of course, the young are not counted. So we are talking about 27, 28 million people. So I cannot understand why Malaysia could not have administered the vaccination in 1 month and solve the problem, at least temporarily, because vaccination is better than nothing. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And does anybody want to add on to that? All right, let's go on to the next question, please.
Can I add some more?
Yeah, okay, go ahead.
Yes. Well, we have the idea of having this emergency ordinance to facilitate what Tan Sri Tommy has mentioned earlier on pushing the private hospitals and private medical facilities. But I think this is the problem of when the king made a summary on this. They mentioned that we must get rid of the bureaucracies. Yeah, I think this is very important. For example, let's look at the state of Selangor. They want to buy. We know that Selangor is having a problem now with a huge number of those affected by COVID-19. So you see the problem that we're having in the States to get the vaccination, the bureaucracies, the political pressure, etc., etc. So I think it is not worth it for any government to play politics at this point of time. That's why they put forward the idea of emergency to mobilize all the strengths in the country to expedite, in particular, the vaccination program. I sometimes wonder why a senior minister like Defense, Ismail Sabri, has to do all this daily briefing, whereas he should go to the ground and mobilize the army to ensure that whatever logistics you have, whatever hindrance of logistics you may have, to mobilize the logistics of the army. We don't need the army to do sekatan jalan raya. Yeah? We need the army to go down and help the people in the kampung in particular, because we have practical problem, Guna. We have practical problem. In my constituency, for example, you want to bring the elderly come to the vaccination center, sometimes it's very far and very difficult. So why don't, when we take over, of course, there'll be a change of the way that we handle this. We will mobilize all the resources and we can do mobile vaccination up to the village and to those really in the desa, in the suburban area. Thank you.
Howard, yeah, go ahead, Howard.
Yeah. Again, I'm not going to answer with theory. I'm going to answer with actions I've taken so far. Absolutely agree that it's a valid question if there is a change of government. I don't even need to think about a change of government to do what is being done. I think I have actually been working with some of the KKM staff and also some of the penyelaras that has been appointed to set up new PPVs or new vaccination centers. There was a brief that came out to seek for 2,000, 3,000 per day more vaccinations. I've managed to facilitate the establishment of a 5,000 per day drive-through vaccination center in the heart of Ipoh. But up to about 2 months ago, I wrote a letter to the state government to say that why don't we mobilize each and every single wakil rakyat, or at least at the state level, all 59, compel all 59 wakil rakyat to set up a local, use their Dewan Orang Ramai, whatever, a stationary PPV and a mobile PPV. Now, the fact is, these recommendations have not actually come to anything in terms of state or government intervention, but nonetheless, I have gone to seek, literally yesterday, I've just finalized a deal to have one big, basically a 12-meter long bus to be converted, retrofitted into a mobile vaccination center. Now, of course, approvals from CITF as well as KKM is yet to be gotten, but I don't care. I'm spending the money first, raising the money to turn it into an infrastructure for when there is enough vaccines. So I think each and every single one of us need to take the responsibility as individuals and as leaders of society to get things done first for when there is room for it, and look about approvals afterwards. And I'm sure if and when there's a bus sitting there said it's ready as a mobile vaccination center, give me the vaccines. If they don't want to give the vaccines, then we talk about it. But of course, if we're in government, that wouldn't be an issue.
Okay, let Vinod go first, and then after that, Tan Sri, is it? Tan Sri Parikam.
Thanks. Thanks. Sorry, I'm jumping in like this. I'm not a panelist, but I feel need to. Forgetting about whether there's a new government, what they do. For me, it's very, very straightforward. Why are we not opening vaccination to private sector? Why don't you let private sector go ahead and buy whatever vaccines they can, bring it in, approved vaccines, just bring it in. Let them flood the market, because businesses have the ability to find vaccines from different countries, to find the approved vaccines, to buy them and bring them in. Let them bring them in, let them give it to their own employees, let them sell it if they want to. Let the rich pay. Let businesses pay. This way, we ease the pressure on the government to help the most at risk. The B40, the families in PPR flats, 5 or 6 in a flat of 750 square feet, all crowded together. Let's protect them. Let the government focus on them. Let the private sector bring it in, take care of the employees. Let's flood the market with vaccines. Testing isn't going to change anything. Vaccination is going to save our country. Vaccination is going to save our economy. Why are we only now talking about last month? Oh, we will allow private clinics to operate in August. Why August? And why the bureaucracy and the paperwork and the applications? You've already approved this type of vaccine. It's a controlled drug. There is a process to bring it into the country. Why not allow it? You know, we need to put aside all these monopolistic tendencies, this idea that perhaps lots of money can be made by different companies for different areas of need. We just need to deal with this as an emergency. Now, we have an emergency on right now. So why are we then talking about the bureaucracy? The whole idea of an emergency is to have the power to do what is necessary. So you don't have to go through the normal hoops. The government doesn't have to go through the normal hoops to do what is necessary. They have the power under the emergency ordinance, just go ahead and do it. So right now, my view would be, if there's a new government, I mean, I hope even this current government just stops this nonsense and just allows the private sector to bring in any of the approved vaccines, whether it's AstraZeneca, whether it's Sinovac, whether it's Sinopharm, whatever, even the Russian one, whatever they can bring in, because the best vaccine that we can have is any vaccine that we can have. And the best way to save our country is to make sure everyone is vaccinated. And we need the government to focus on the poorest. We need the government to focus on the ones that are living in PPR and contributing to our economy, but can't. So that would be my view anyway. And I don't understand why that's not happening.
All right, Tan Sri Pandika, please.
Yes, yes, Tuan Polisi. Setelah mendengar hujah daripada Tan Sri Thomas dan daripada Datuk Bernard tadi, saya amat bersetuju, terutama sekali kepada persoalan yang ditimbulkan oleh Datuk Bernard, yaitu kenapa tidak libatkan private sector? Karena sekarang ini pengalaman kami di Sabah ialah apabila ahli-ahli keluarga mendaftar dengan sejahtera, lepas itu tarikh untuk divaksin ditetapkan. Tetapi apabila tarikh itu sudah sampai, dimaklumkan lagi kepada yang mendaftar itu bahwa tarikh itu ditangguhkan kepada satu tarikh lagi, sehingga 3 kali ditangguhkan. Jadi saya bertanya kepada pihak yang berwajib di negeri Sabah, kenapa begini? Jawaban yang kita terima ialah bahwa vaksin yang ditunggu-tunggu itu tidak sampai. Jadi adakah ini betul? Kalau ini betul, kerajaan sekarang ini, the government of the day now must tell the rakyat, why the slowness? We can have all those places that we can go, but if there is no medication, why? Kriteria lagi satu yang saya dengar ialah orang-orang yang berumur itu di atas 60 tahun, 65 tahun itu yang diberi priority. Itu yang diberi priority karena kononnya jangkitan COVID ini lebih menjangkit kepada orang-orang yang berumur macam saya ini 65 tahun, 66. Dan itu konon yang didahulukan dan orang-orang muda ini dikemudiankan. Tetapi ada keluarga yang mau juga anak-anak mereka untuk divaksin lebih awal. Dan mereka ini berkemampuan. Daripada menunggu lama, mereka berkemampuan untuk membeli vaksin itu daripada private sector, daripada hospital-hospital dan klinik-klinik. Kenapa ini tidak dibuat? Daripada kita cekup muka kita sepanjang masa, kadang-kadang kita tidak boleh bernapas. Kadang-kadang kita dalam satu kereta dengan anak bini yang ada satu rumah. Now we are already psychologically affected. Wherever you go, you put that mask on your mouth. Even eating sometimes. I sometimes forget to take off that mask. Dan antara disumbat makanan di mulut yang bertutup dengan mask. All this nonsense must go away. Masih.
Okay, thank you, Tan Sri. Can we have the next question, please? All right, if there is a procedure to reconvene Parliament, is there a procedure to remove a PM who is not fit to rule, as is the present case? Tan Sri Tommy?
Well, I think the safer method is to go back to where we began, which is does this Prime Minister, current Prime Minister, the incumbent, does he enjoy the majority support in the lower house? Because that's the safest way. Because if we talk about competence and non-competence and all those are very subjective elements and we very much influenced by party politics and the whip. So I would rather answer the question by saying, look, we know that this Prime Minister has never enjoyed the majority support of 112 or more, which is why Parliament has never allowed, entertained that motion of confidence. So the only way is what I had suggested earlier. The king can say, look, I am now 16 months later, not satisfied when you have it. You have to summon Parliament, which is happening, and you have to pass that motion. You have to get more than 112. Because if you don't, you will be removed. Because otherwise, if you just have the head of state simply removing the head of government, there are problems because we are a constitutional monarchy against the background of parliamentary democracy. And I just remind you of the notorious Gough Whitlam example. The Gough Whitlam, who was removed by the Governor General, head of state in Australia in 1975. Till today, it is a very controversial thing to do. So it's better to go through tried and tested method, the flow of the day one right. Thank you.
Thank you. Next question. I think this will probably be the last question. We'll have to start wrapping up. Can parties transcend racial and religious politics? Are the people still divided racially? Or is it just our politics? Quite a contentious one, that one. Open to anyone? Go ahead, Howard.
Was that a question to me? Okay, never mind. I think now this is going to sound a bit, what do you call it? This is going to sound a bit contentious. I personally think that the real contention in our society is not actually one of race. It's not actually one of religion. The real contention is class and the economics grand scheme of things. There is an age-old saying that hunger breeds anger. And when people feel dissatisfied with the current situation, generally brought on by the economy, translating into them being hungry or finding them basically hungry for either a job, hungry for food, hungry for progress, they become angry. And the only problem is when you're angry, your mind is subjected to lots and lots of propaganda, which leads you to be angry towards something. And more often than not, and unfortunately in our country, that anger is directed at the other. And when you're in a multiracial setting, it's easy to manipulate one's mind into essentially saying the other is one of the other race, saying the other is of the other religion. But actually, the real other and the real gap of contention is the rich and the poor, really, to be fair. And if once we start to understand the real gap is with income, with capacity, and it's an economic one, like what's happening on the ground now, I think people start to realize that the problem isn't to do with people of another race. It's not because people of another, because we're equally hungry. So
so sometimes there can be a problem of politicians highlighting race as a difference and religion.
Which is my final point. Okay, I think if we can get the politicians to cut the bullshit and really address the issues ahead of us, that we are facing a class war. We are facing an issue of access to opportunities and access to a decent job, decent work, decent living. And then suddenly you'll find that because the political elite aren't, fanning the polarizing sentiments of race and religion, and just talk about how do we work together to get everyone a nice warm meal at the end of the day or 3 times a day, then you'll see a de-escalation of the racial tensions and the religious tensions and focus on the real issue at hand. So I think there's no silver bullet and there's no holy grail that can be found. This needs to be an all of government, all of society, and all of the citizenship approach to say, let's deal with the real issues. This is not about a religious war. This is not about a racial war. This is a class war that we need to close the gap. So I think that's right. my understanding of the situation.
Guna, can I add something?
Okay, go ahead.
Okay. I believe there is systemic racism in Malaysia. I believe, and this racism is created by leaders, and because I come from ACS Ipoh, okay, Anglo-Chinese School Ipoh, where we have multiracial friends, right? And we were taught from when we were young, this is how Malaysia is. You know, the guy on the right is a Chinese, the guy in front is an Indian, you know, and you hang out with everyone, right? But then when you leave school, suddenly you start to follow certain tribes, right? And what the tribe leader says, you tend to agree. And that is why we need to have leaders that are you know, inclined to this real Malaysia values. You know, we need those leaders. And that's why sometimes I don't understand why, for example, an Islamic party, I'm Islam, I'm Muslim, right? And an Islamic party can use Islam as a tool to gain confidence in the Islamic voters, for example. And they use the religion, and some use, like, you know, whatever other party would use race as the thing. Oh, this is our right, this is our thing, you know, nobody can step on our rights. Yeah, of course, regardless, there are many stories of how we got to where we are, you know. But shouldn't we be really talking about Malaysia as a whole? For example, let me just take an example at a film festival that was once at a Malaysian film festival, where an Indian film, a Tamil movie, was up for best film, and then suddenly there was an uproar because, oh, it's not in Malay, right? So as a filmmaker, I don't care if the film's in Malay or in Tamil. If it's a good film, it's a good film, right? So they had to come up with a way to actually justify that this Tamil movie was better than any other Malay movie, and by saying, oh, the best national film instead of best film. So why is that? You know, yes, I agree. Bahasa Malaysia is bahasa pengantar kita. Memang, you know, if anything that we should do is we should represent Bahasa Malaysia as our, you know, something we hang on to. But when you're talking about films, you're talking about things that go international, that can travel outside. Yeah, there needs to be an understanding that whatever represents Malaysia. It doesn't have to be in a particular thing, you know. So I do believe there is, and on the ground level, what the pandemic has done has shown that that we can work together on the ground level. You know, people are working together, the Indians, and suddenly it's back. We're back in school, you know, where the Indian guy is helping out the Malay neighbor, the Malay guy is helping out the Chinese neighbor is helping out everyone, and that's the thing.
Okay.
The divide is from the top, from the politicians.
Okay, thanks. Thanks for that, Aflin. We are already at 12:30 now. I'm going to extend this by 15 minutes. I apologize for that. There are two people who want to say something else on this. We'll start with Pandika and then go on to Tommy, and then we'll move to the wrap up after that.
Okay, thank you. Terima kasih, Tuan Porosi. Alhamdulillah, thank God that in Sabah we don't have racial and religious problem. We don't have that. However, we have these three problems. One, kemiskinan di luar bandar. Kedua, regional politics, yaitu kami punya political guru di Semenanjung ini terlampau interfere dengan Sabah politics. Ketiga, politik divide and rule. Keempat, kalau saya tambah lagi dengan soal peruntukan, kalau sekiranya peruntukan cukup di Sabah untuk membangun negeri Sabah yang begitu tertinggal, saya rasa tidak ada isu Malaysian Agreement 63. Malaysian Agreement 63 dibangkitkan selalu oleh pemimpin-pemimpin rakyat Sabah, oleh karena dalam spirit Malaysian Agreement itu telah dijanjikan bermacam-macam oleh guru-guru politik dari Malaya. So enough is enough. Look at us in Sabah. We don't have religious problem and racial problem. You have in Malaya. Jangan libatkan kami di Sabah. Yang kami mau ialah regional politics. Tolong tengok itu regional politik. Jangan tengok Sabah ini sebagai Sabah dan Sarawak sebagai daerah ataupun wilayah yang tidak ada dia punya sumbangan politik kepada negara Malaysia. One day I can tell you this, maybe in a decade from now ataupun 15 tahun, we will not be talking about democracy. We will not be talking about rule of law. We will be talking about a different matter, bigger than you people think. We will be discussing at that time that these two wilayah, Sabah and Sarawak, will be out from Malaysia. Thank you.
That will probably be a topic for another conversation. No, but anyway, I think let's go on to Tan Sri Tommy first.
Yeah, just to remind us, Mr. Moderator, just to remind us, the question was, would racial politics and religious politics reduce in future? And if I could try and answer that in 30 seconds, if you look back at the history from the Second World War, the last 70, 75 years, it has gone in cycles. So there are periods when race and racial and religious differences are brought to a minimum. So I think against that background, I would say that the COVID situation of today, and particularly the government's terrible response to it, has united Malaysians as never before. It's taken a tragedy to unite us. So it will probably be, we are probably one of those points in time where it's at a minimum. But I'm being cynical, it can very easily change in the next 2 or 3 years if the politicians, for their own selfish reasons, harp on race and religion and the electorate response. So it will be, what I would say is this is a temporary phenomenon. Thank you.
All right. Okay, let's move on to the wrap up. So we have maybe about 12 to 15 minutes for that. Now, can each of you give us 2 moves or measures or reforms we should think will help lift the emergency, push the democratic agenda, and ensure the rule of law in Malaysia? 2 minutes each. Dato Sri Samshul, please.
Yeah, thank you very much. Well, I think first, of course, we need to empower the education. For example, when we talk about, when we answer the questions of whether moving ahead, we still face the problems of race. Yeah, let's fall back to the Rukun Negara. Yeah. Well, Rukun Negara once drafted by Alarham Tun Saleh Abbas, yeah, and the team because of 1969. Yeah. For example, if you look into the keluhuran perlembagaan, kesetiaan kepada raja dan negara, the national unity, yeah, you must put a stark difference between nationalism and also the national unity. And this is what thinkers like Roger Scruton mentioned, that look, nationalism will somehow rather erode the democratic dynamics in the country. Rather, he imposes or empowers the national unity, where people on various races will go through the national unity progress, their national identity. And this is what it meant by Para 2 of the Rukun Negara. So I think if we put focus on education right from the very beginning, where certain elements of that must be imposed, then I think we are moving out from this cocoon of racism. As what Tan Sri Pandika mentioned, I mean, I salute Sabah. I was there for 2 years when during those time my wife was transferred 24 hours there. So we witnessed how people in Sabah interact, and I think it's a good example to all of us, first. And second, I think on this anti-hopping, yeah, because this anti-hopping can create, I would say just now, the social distrust. peoples and the leaders. Well, if we look into the lens, from the lens of legislation, people will say that we need to amend the constitution. I think our former AG should answer that, why this issue has not been brought as the priority during the previous government. Because now we are having this problem, we are having this trust deficit, trust to the public because of what's happening. People jump here and there. So I think this can create instability in the future for the government. I think
so you would want something to be done about anti-hopping law, no?
Yes.
And education. So Howard?
Yes. If we had to whittle down to two things, I think right now, in order to get back to democracy, you need the vehicle of democracy restored. Not just that, I think Parliament itself should be restored back to its rightful place, to be the body that the government is subservient to. Of course, there are ways and means of how to strengthen and empower Parliament by having more special select committees that ministers will have to report to, and recommendations can be resolved in Parliament for the government to be to execute and carry out as policy, especially during these times of difficulty and transition. So parliamentary restoration of Parliament as the vehicle of democracy and the rule of law. And I think the other one is, in order for us to get to that place, we need the people to be not hungry again, and the people not to be in desperation to, pay their rent again. Because I do think that many would agree it's not just about getting hungry. It's also about the inability to pay for this month's rent and last month's rent, and 3 or 4 months before, when they just lost their job because of the pandemic. So I'm calling for essentially the demos part of democracy. The people needs to be taken care of through the economy, i.e. we need extra spending. The government needs to be rolling out, with Parliament's consent, at least 50 billion more of real direct spending, fiscal injection, of which at least 30 or 35 of it has to go in the form of basically utility subsidy and rent subsidy to individuals and SMEs. So spending, restoration of Parliament.
Okay, thank you. Tan Sri Tommy?
Yes, I think insofar as restoring democracy is concerned, let's take that first very quickly. That can be easily done by revoking the emergency, getting Parliament to sit immediately, and then, in a sense, restoring the democratic space, which has shrunk a bit in the last 16 months. So we must get back to as much democratic space as possible. And if there's one specific legislation, I changed my mind. I am now for the introduction of an anti-hopping law. I was initially against it, but having regard to what's happened with the fall of the PH government and the Sabah government recently, I am all for new laws which pass the constitutional muster. And then insofar as, but that in a sense is not enough, because I come back to COVID and the real problems of Malaysians, because Malaysians who are dying will regard what I just said before as luxuries. So in order to look after the Malaysians who are suffering, I've already talked about vaccines, but the part I've not talked about is the economics part of it. I agree with Howard. There has to be a massive payment out. There's liquidity problems and cash flow problems that are faced by millions of Malaysians and companies. So we really must give them cash handouts. And if that means the country has to issue bonds and go into deficit, so be it, because it is for a wonderful reason, which is to make sure the people of Malaysia and the companies of Malaysia do not go under. Thank you.
Tan Sri Pandika?
Now, the theme of this discussion today is, if I were to read it in my interpretation in Malay, darurat menjelas peraturan perundangan membebankan kepada demokrasi yang lemah yang dikompromikan oleh lompat-melompat parti untuk membuang pemerintah yang sah. Now, that's our theme of discussion today. Tuan Pengerusi, with all due respect, I don't agree with this statement or the message that the statement is trying to portray to the public for various reasons. One, the emergency that we have now is not a coup d'etat that suspended the Malaysian constitution. Parliament is not dissolved. Cabinet is in business as usual. Election is not postponed. Two, the emergency is done in accordance to the provision of the Constitution under Article 150, read together with Article 40. Three, if the emergency is not against the provision of the Constitution, why do we say that it subverts the rule of law? Four, the emergency does not interfere or affect the function of the other branches or institutions of the government. The courts, judiciary, still carrying its own business as usual. Five, the emergency does not curtail the rakyat democratic rights under the Constitution. The fact that we are having this webinar discussion freely, very important issues, are proof that our freedom of speech in Malaysia is a democratic country still intact. Six, the only slight or minimal effect of the emergency is that it disturbs the normal business or function of Parliament, i.e. the check and balance function. But even this minimal interference is constitutional in that the AGO exercises power under Article 150 of the Constitution. In some might say that exercising of power is read together with Article 40. Some will say that exercising of power was done by himself, not due to the advice of the Prime Minister. Seven, the spirit of democracy in Malaysia has not been weakened by the emergency. To me, it is still well, alive and kicking. It is still robust. The fact that we're discussing open democracy in Malaysia is robust. Eight, to me, the Sheraton move that brought about a new government, whether we like it or not, whether it is a Frando government or wherever it's come from or not, did not kill democracy. It is done in the spirit of democracy in Malaysia. It's a matter of fact, I dare say, it reinforces democratic spirit of democracy in Malaysia in the context of freedom of speech and freedom of association. Okay. That's what democracy is all about. That is freedom of speech and freedom of association. Now, democracy is not a perfect means of government. The former Prime Minister of Britain, United Kingdom, Winston Churchill said, the worst form of government is democracy. Nine, to me,
Tan Sri, but you were supposed to tell us two measures which will actually help reform democracy, and you have only 2 minutes to do that.
Nine, to me, if the Sheraton move government is removed and replaced with other government without going through election, the principle is the same. That is, different groups of MPs from different political parties band together to form a government. That government, in my mind, is also legitimate government under the Constitution, like the government now. What's the problem?
So you feel that there is nothing that has to be done to improve democracy and get rid of emergency?
Let me finish my point, Tuan Speaker, Tuan Pengerusi. Now, 10, however, numerous questions would arise if the new government is formed. A, would the new government, if it was a coalition of UMNO, DEP, and PKR, be more stable than the current one? Now, if assuming that the intentions of this webinar is to condition the mind of the people, those politicians in PKR, UMNO, and DEP must come up clean, tell the public how many MPs from UMNO are supporting this move, how many from PKR, how many from DEP, are there any parties involved, so that the riot can make up their mind. Now, would the new government, UMNO, DEP, and other parties more stable than the current one? My answer to that, from my experience, I doubt it. B, would the new government be able to solve the COVID pandemic in a healthy economic situation of the nation better than the current government? My answer to that, again, I doubt it. Its conclusion, in my mind, the problem before us is neither one, the diminishing of our democratic right under the Constitution, nor the impingement of the rule of law. It is purely political problem. Is such. Yep. The frontliners politicians in Malaysia must work out a solution for the good of the rakyat. This can be done. Now, this is my suggestion. If the frontliners politicians were one, they must put aside their personal political agenda Second,
Okay.
to put aside all personal political ego. Now, my worry, Tuan Pengurus, is this. My worry now is the involvement of the Istana in descending to the political arena due to the never-ending political bickering of the politicians. The involvement of the Istana in settling political bickering might bring about a new political culture that culminate into the erosion of the spirit of adalah demokrasi berparlimen.
Tan Sri, I think we really have to move along. If I may make a couple of comments on what you have said and then move along with this. I think many Malaysians realize that whatever has been done during this emergency could have been done without having to impose the emergency. The emergency was imposed for the sole purpose of fighting COVID-19. And in that, it did not succeed at all. No? In fact, the COVID-19 situation is much worse in spite of the emergency. So, and the emergency actually, as many of the speakers here have pointed out, has just removed the democratic space through parliament for nothing at all at the end of the day. So let me go on to Aflin, your two moves and measures.
Okay, first of all, I think saya nak berbicara dalam bahasa Melayu because bahasa Malaysia kerana banyak orang yang tengah menonton saya di Facebook saya komen kenapa tak cakap Melayu. So so I'll do this dalam bahasa Melayu, okay? So mula-mula sekali sebelum apa-apa pun adalah saya harap Sabah dan Sarawak tak keluar dari Malaysia pasal isteri saya dari Sabah dan problem nak dapatkan dia nanti nationality Malaysia pula. So dan terus kepada jawapan Tuan Guna, satu adalah jangan bodoh sombong. Maknanya saya rasa Tan Sri Pandeka ada touch benda ni tadi. Jangan bodoh sombong. Kalau kita dalam government dan kalau ada benda kita tak tahu, tak apa. Kita semua ada benda yang kita tak tahu, betul tak? So ego ataupun apa, kita bertanya kepada orang yang lebih pandai. Dan jangan maknanya kita minta kerjasama daripada sesiapa yang boleh membantu kita yang untuk mengatasi masalah yang ada. Pasal contohnya lah, pandemik ni is unprecedented kan, tak pernah berlaku. Jadi apa salahnya kita bertanya, siapa ada jalan yang terbaik, apa yang boleh kita buat. Satu, okey. Dan yang keduanya senang saja, kembali kepada biar orang sayang kembali dunia politik ni. Biar rakyat memahami caranya bagaimana. Communicate, maknanya berikan communicate kepada rakyat ni apa yang politician ni buat sebenarnya. Communicate kepada rakyat apa dia sebenarnya yang dilakukan dan langkah-langkah yang perlu diambil di dalam politik untuk membantu diorang. Pasal saya rasa ada satu macam disjointment ke apa, yang maknanya tak berhubung. Yang sekarang ni rakyat dengan politician kat sini, rakyat dekat sini kan. So maknanya tak ada dan tak faham. Jadi tak faham apa yang dibuat pasal nampaknya macam rakyat ni adalah macam kalau kita main catur, main chess kan. Kita ni yang rakyat ni pawn aja, dia gerakkan aja mana-mana dia suka, yang king, queen, bishop semua kat belakang ni semua relax. Dia buat, okey, kita buat ni, rakyat tu kita sacrifice dulu. Itu tak boleh. Dia nak, so komunikasi ni penting kerana bila rakyat faham politik dan rakyat sayang pada politician yang baik dan macam mana jadi politician yang baik adalah tunjuk ke akhlak yang baik. Maknanya perbuatan kita sentiasa disukai rakyat. Maknanya kalau rakyat sentiasa diberitahu tentang apa yang sedang berlaku, okey macam ni, kita kena buat macam ni kerana macam ni. Mungkin persoalan rakyat, jawab persoalan rakyat. Jangan buat bodoh, jangan diam, jangan macam ini this is how it is. Tak boleh, pasal rakyat nak tahu. Dia nak tahu kenapa. Ya, lebih-lebih lagi sekarang ni televisyen kita mesti penuh dengan informasi untuk menerangkan kepada rakyat langkah-langkah politik yang sedang berlaku. Langkah-langkah kenapa penting buka parlimen, kenapa penting apa ni semua. Pasal bila dia orang tahu baru dia akan kena buka parlimen. Pasal ni wakil aku ni kat sini ni nak lawan untuk aku ni. Kenapa dia tak diberi peluang untuk bersuara? Kan, kenapa suara kami ni tak penting sedangkan kami yang menerima habuan daripada apa yang sedang berlaku. Whatever is happening now, sekarang ni, diorang tak buat, diorang ikut arahan dan diorang kena. So, itu macam triple jeopardy lah kepada dia, kan? So, pada saya, kita kena kembalikan politik yang berakhlak. Tunjuk ke akhlak yang baik. Akhlak ni is macam how you carry yourself. Macam mana kau bawa diri kau. Bagaimana kau mementingkan rakyat dahulu sebelum yang lain-lain, kerana itulah sebenarnya tugasan ahli politik. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Alvin. All right. I think we had an interesting discussion overall. We had many different points of views, but despite some political speeches, I think we came to some agreements on some of these things. So the consensus seems to be that the parliament can be convened by the king. And then the other thing is that the speaker should put the motion of no confidence as an important matter and let it be resolved when parliament reconvenes. The other thing that clearly comes up is a lot of there's a lot of conditions, a lot of feedback that it's high time for the politicians to work together, and you should actually engage the people. So we can go on discussing this, but I think we have to bring this to a close. We have already taken up a lot of time. We have 25 minutes over time. So let me thank the speakers for their participation, wisdom, and contribution, and especially the viewer, for participating in this function, which aims to build informed discussion and debate with a view to finding solutions. So this is P. Gunasegaram signing off for Sekar Institute and the Vibes. So till we meet again at our next webinar, goodbye and thank you again.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you, Guna.
Yep.
Thank you.
Are we done?
Yes.
Yep, we are done. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Okay, alright.
Bye.
Jangan marah-marah, Tan Sri. Jangan marah-marah.
Okay.
Banyak perkara yang belum saya cakap.
Kita semua cakap
Jangan marah, Tan Sri. Saya pun banyak benda
Kita
perlu cakap lagi, Tan Sri.
Kita punya team of